travel journalist, TV host, radio host, Rudy Maxa. Welcome.
Thank you, Stefan. Nice to be here.
And you're in my home state of Minnesota. You said it's a dark day inside. Is it? I know my parents said it became winter again last week.
It did, but yesterday was lovely. It was actually spring. I went for a 20-mile bike ride and it was 70 degrees. Today it's mild, but it's very dark and rainy.
Let's jump
But
right into your vocation. So you've got TV shows that I would guess you're not producing at the moment, but you've started webcasts, you do radio interviews. What has this transition been like to get set up as a journalist during this time?
well, about 9 years ago, I started a weekend radio show that's on about 410 news talk stations in the United States now, along with my co-host Robert and Mary Carey. And so I'm still doing that. But when you ask about changes, my fee is dependent on a percentage of the advertising that the syndicate brings in. And we've had a couple major travel advertisers who have gone on hiatus as far as running spots for obvious reasons, because no one's going on cruise ships or hotels. And both of those, all three of those were either hotel related or cruise ship related. So that's so there's a change in my income, let me put it that way. But I'm still doing the radio show every weekend. It's 2 hours on the weekends. It's called RM World Travel. And I started for no revenue, I started a webcast about 5 weeks ago that I do every Thursday afternoon at 2 p.m. New York time for about an hour. And I have on generally about two interesting guests. And it grew somewhat out of the radio show, Stefan. The radio show, because it's commercial radio, has a lot of commercial interruptions, should I say, or messages.
Mhm.
So, a long interview might be 6 to 8 minutes. And sometimes you get a Paul Theroux on, or a Simon Winchester, or an Andrew Zimmern, or Rick Steves on, and you want to go longer than 8 minutes. So this on Thursday allows me to talk to somebody for 25 or 30 minutes who I think is very interesting in a way that's, I think, much more natural and more informative for an audience. I call it I Was Thinking. And you can sign up for it by going to maxatours.com and scroll down to the bottom of the page, and you can sign up there for my newsletter, and you'll also receive notices of the webcast. And I guess I forgot last year I started with a partner named Tommy Danielson, a tour company called Maxa Tours to Europe, and we ran one season, and we were about to do this season. But as you can imagine, this is not the time to have a tour company. So that has certainly changed in my life due to the coronavirus. As far as television goes, my shows still run on public television. Many of them, I've done 98 of them. You can get them on YouTube, on Amazon Prime, that sort of thing. But I'm not. You're right. I'm not shooting any new shows. Those have to be financed by corporate underwriting, and there aren't many corporations willing to dig deeply into their pockets to sponsor a series of travel shows right now.
Talk about
There you
that
go.
financing model for public television.
Well, it's funny, interesting you should ask, because, as I say, I have 98 half-hour episodes on from all over the world, from Africa, from South America, from Asia and Europe, and so people think, "Wow, this guy must be rolling in the dough." And stations, public television stations, air them over and over again. And when I was first asked to host a show before I owned the shows as I do now, I thought, "Gosh, these shows are going to, my ship has come in. I'll get all these residuals." There are no residuals. In fact, public television stations do not pay me a single penny for those shows. I have to pay $1,000 per episode to just get it up on the satellite. So I have to self-finance everything. But I do run into people all the time say, "I give to my local public television station. I certainly hope they're giving you some of that money." And I go, "Well, it doesn't quite work that way." So that's the business model. The business model is I go out and find underwriters. Corporate underwriters in the past have been Expedia, leading hotels of the world, MedJet Assist, all kinds of companies. Whoever I can find.
Sounds like quite a hustle. And what are the mechanics of a day of shooting video?
Well, the mechanics are, I mean, we're pretty lean because, I don't have some luxurious open paycheck or checkbook from Netflix or HBO or NBC or CBS. We generally shoot with a shooter, though the last couple of seasons, we've been shooting with two shooters, which is really a luxury because we can do one shooter with me, me doing stand-ups and whatever, and with another shooter can do B-roll, which gets us done a lot faster. We do generally cities. We might do a region like Provence, Tuscany, that sort of thing, North Island of New Zealand or South Island of New Zealand. Those will probably take 7 to 8 days to do. The regions, I should say, because there's a lot of driving around involved. If you're doing a city like Paris or London or I don't know, Cape Town, we can usually do that in about 6 days. But there's a lot of pre prep work or prep work that goes into that because you got to figure out not only what you're going to shoot, generally what the theme of the show is, generally what the script is, generally who you might want to interview. You've also got to figure out what time it's ideal to shoot, say, the front of that great cathedral or that Colosseum, because if the sun's not on it, it's a grim shot. So you have to figure out what season you're shooting, where the sun is at, and when the proper time is to be at that particular site, and then that particular site, and that particular site. It's a lot of work. And then, of course, there's the editing and sound sweetening and color correcting and getting it exactly the time, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
I'm hearing that my audio has an issue, which we've not encountered, but you're doing well. So we'll focus on you doing the talking as much as I try to fix that question. Are you worried that we will never be back to normal travel? What does your crystal ball say?
Um, well, I think it'll be a while, but before we're back to normal travel, I think it'll be a couple years of healthy living before we feel really great about, well, we never feel really great about sitting in a middle seat, but at least feel safe sitting in a middle seat. This social distancing thing, it's even in just the 5 or 6 weeks I've been doing it here in St. Paul, Minnesota. You go in a grocery store, you give people wide berth, you see a friend when you're out walking, and you stand a few feet more than normal away from them. So it's sort of getting ingrained, and you don't shake anybody's hand. That's sort of getting ingrained into our social mannerisms, I think. And I think that'll be with us for a while, until everybody's sort of healthy and we're back to living a normal life. I mean, the economy is going to be different. Our travel habits are going to be different. There's all kinds of different things going on health-wise in different countries. So you have to think about where you're going to go to a little more carefully, particularly if you're booking ahead and you don't know if the country's going to be open then, or if your country will be open for easy return without having to go into quarantine for 14 days. It's going to be a while. I
It
can't
doesn't sound
predict.
like back to normal any at all.
No, it's not normal. It's not. Sadly, I mean, it seems like so long ago that you just go. I mean, my granddaughters live in London and France, and it just seems so long ago because I try to see them out every 6 weeks. It just seems so long ago to think that, oh, I think I should book a ticket now for London or for Paris or, a dear friend of mine who lives in Bangkok.
Fantastic. And what about the cruise industry? It's an industry I know nothing about. I think you've been talking to people.
Boy, the cruise industry, first of all, of course, they obviously took it in the chin. I mean, I think the river cruise industry will come back fairly quickly because, you're talking 160, 180 people on a vessel. Um, it's not a lot of buffets. They usually have a buffet, but the larger cruise lines, I mean, they unfortunately got tagged with that floating petri dish moniker and had trouble getting into ports with people who were ill, and in fact, some who have died on board. It's going to be very tough, I think, for the large cruise companies to get back into the swing of things. I think they're going to have to offer incredible bargains. They're going to have to really convince passengers of their commitment to cleanliness, and it'll be a while. That's probably going to be a tough business. I mean, the hotel business is going to be tough. I remember one hotelier once telling me, if we showed you a picture of the last 100 people who slept in your bedroom, you probably wouldn't go into the bedroom, which I try not to think about because I love hotels. But and how they're going to, I mean, I'm sure everybody in this audience, if they're frequent hotel guests or airline passengers, have gotten emails from the CEOs saying, we're establishing new parameters for cleaning hotel rooms or cleaning planes in between flights, et cetera. And that's all great. Uh, but I can't quite imagine hotels putting big signs out front. We're cleaner, we're Hilton and we're cleaner than Four Seasons or we're cleaner than, Radisson or Marriott or whatever. It's going to be a very subtle kind of marketing, but I think they're going to have to market cleanliness and attention to detail.
Makes me think, I lived in China for almost a decade, and when my father would visit, he would actually like some of the more budget hotel chains because several of these had tile floors. And instead of
Okay.
musty carpets that might bother him, there'd be often lax enforcement of smoking rooms or things at some of the fancier hotels. He would just want tile floors, and I was thinking of that kind of shift of if people start having totally different expectations for their hotel rooms.
I certainly am pleased when I check into a hotel room that has all wood floors or a faux wood floor. It could be bamboo, could be, that plastic that looks like wood, but at least it's much easier to clean. Yeah, shaggy carpetings are out.
Mhm.
Um, I think there will be changes. I know Marriott was talking about no more notepads with pens on the desk in the room because 100 people touched it before you do in theory.
Mhm.
So bring your own notepad and pen if you're going to stay in a hotel now. There will be changes. There will be changes in all kinds of things. Yeah.
Ben Sand is asking, Sicily just announced they're going to pay 50% of people's flights in attempts to lure people back when this passes. Do you think more places will follow suit?
Wow. Wow. That's incredible. I love Sicily. I'll head right back to Sicily. In fact, we were supposed to be leading a tour to Sicily next month, but we won't be, obviously. Uh, that's that seems like a lot of money for Sicily or for anybody for that matter.
That's for flights.
Right, still,
Mhm.
that's a lot of money. I mean, a
Yeah,
lot of people go to Sicily.
yeah.
Rick Steves alone runs like 20 or more tours a year to Sicily a summer. That's a lot of people.
Is
I
it that
don't know
busy?
if anybody
When
else.
I visited, it was in the fall, and so I had the tour sites to myself, it seemed. But
Yeah, I think that would be the time to go. Fall. I don't know if they're paying. I don't know if. Boy, that's really really interesting. I can't imagine many destinations can afford to do that, frankly. And I don't know that airlines can afford to cut rates as much as I think we all are hoping they will to get us back in the plane. I mean, maybe they'll do some special offers right out of the box, but they got a lot of money to make up for.
he's saying it's apparently a $50 million budget, so it may not go all that incredibly far. It'll be like the small business funding that you know the
Right. The
the
first the
people with
first
the
3 days
inside
are
deal
sold
get
out.
everything. Yeah.
Where did Sicily get $50 million for this? I don't want to know. Don't ask.
Let's talk about Sicily as a destination. What was the tour itinerary you were planning, and why did you select those places?
Uh, well, I picked Sicily because I liked it. Well, we came into the northern part of Sicily and then went around near Syracuse and wound up down by Mount Etna and Mount Etna, yeah, Mount Etna, right. So it was about a 9 day, 8 or 9 day tour. We choose our destinations partly on what people tell us where they'd like to go, and partly what I and my partner Tommy Danielson know fairly well. I grew up partly in Europe and spent a lot of time traveling there. My daughter has lived there for, I don't know, many years, and I certainly did a lot of television shows in Europe, so I had some very strong feelings about where I wanted to go. This year we added Portugal, which we did not do last year.
Mm-hmm.
These are all canceled, of course. We added a tour of Estonia and Lithuania and Latvia, winding up, well, the other way, really going up at Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, winding up in Helsinki, which we called a Baltic tour, which was new. Then we did by public demand, a Scotland, England tour. So we sort of pick it, depending on where we think people want to go. And, we go to these large travel shows, the Los Angeles Travel Adventure Show, the one in Dallas, the one in Chicago, the one in Washington, the one in San Jose/San Francisco, et cetera. And a lot of people come up to our booth, and they go, "Oh, well, I wish you went here."
Mm-hmm.
And if we hear a lot of "I wish you went here's," we may plan them well for the next year and plan that. And they're very small tours, maybe 10 people, 8 people, 12 people. We want to be intimate, and they're fairly upscale. I mean, they're all 4 and 5 star hotels. All meals are included. All meals, which I don't know any other tour company that does that. And you leave your luggage in one hotel room. It's your next when you get there. Either I or my partner have eaten in every single one of the dinner restaurants. We really care about that. So they're fairly different tours than many others.
And these are tours that you personally joined?
I personally joined every one of them last year because I wanted to go on every one and see how we could tweak and make them better and so on. And I did learn some things. I think our guests all had a good time, but I learned some things we could do better. And I will go on some of them each year, yes, as many as I can, or at least we'll try to drop in on most of them for 2 or 3 days and just meet the guests and see how it's going.
So in one sense, you probably saw yourself as a travel expert, and the world sees you that way. And then you get into the tour business, and what have you learned from entering that business and interacting with travelers in that capacity that you realize maybe you didn't know anything about travel?
Well, I never wanted to run a tour company, and Rick Steves, who also does his shows on public television in America, on primarily on Europe, has run tours for years, and he runs like 30, 40,000 people a year. It's an incredible number of people. He's become a multimillionaire.
Hmm.
And he has a sort of ethos about travel. To stay in, we don't want a hotel with a concierge or fancy stuff. You got to be able to carry your luggage up 3 flights of stairs. Make a sandwich using the ham and cheese and bread and breakfast, and that's your lunch. And so ours is more different, as I said. With good meals, nicer hotels. There's never a bus or anybody with a flag or an umbrella leading you around. Um, so so that's different than other tours that I knew about, and I learned a lot. Some people want to do. We did a Paris to Venice tour that was exhausting to me. It
Hmm.
was, 2 nights in Paris, 1 night in Burgundy, 1 night in Lyon, 1 night in Geneva, 1 night in the Swiss Alps, 1 or 2 nights in Lake Garda and Lake Como, finally in Venice for 1.5 days. It was exhausting. And I thought, this was not fun. But most of the people, 90% of the people who signed up for those tours, we did 2 of those identical tours, had never been to Europe.
Mm.
And it occurred to me that they really wanted to punch some. They wanted, oh, yeah, I've been to Geneva, yeah, I've been to Paris, yeah, I've been to Lake Garda, I've been to Lake Como, that kind of thing. They wanted to see, perhaps to come back and spend more time in other places. So, and I also, I'd taken press trips when I was a much younger travel writer, uh, and there's always somebody on a trip, generally somebody on the trip, who irritates people or is cranky. He got a better hotel room than I did. She got a, whatever. Or I want to stay longer having coffee here in this coffee shop than everybody else does. So I knew that there could be some conflicts like that. There weren't many on my tours at all, but I'm certainly prepared for that at some point. But we talk to our guests long before they start the trip, find out what they want to do. We'll make it happen. In other words, if we have a tour for the day in Paris and they don't want to either go on the tour, we don't care. Go sit in a cafe and smoke Gauloise if you want. Or if you want to go to something that we have not put on our tour, our itinerary for the day, we will pay an Uber car to get you there. We'll pay your entry to that museum or that attraction, whatever. So we try to be very flexible. So we try not to have cranky people.
Fantastic. And on the future of travel theme, James is asking about, do you think some countries will abandon strict visa requirements in an attempt to kickstart their tourist industries?
Gosh, it would sure be a good idea, wouldn't it? I mean, even visiting Russia, is a real bother visa wise. And
Mhm.
um,
Well, on that
you
theme,
know,
I
I,
mean, it seems like you know more
I
about the
wonder if you could
travel
look at it the
industry.
other way.
Well, I'm thinking if you look at the travel industry, it represents a lot of different jobs and parts of GDP, but it's not like big oil. You have a few companies with a lot of political power within each company. So you've got a lot of smaller companies lobbying for tourism and opening up. And then you probably have in most countries some very big um, domestic interests, whatever industries they may be, or citizen groups that are saying we just want to be safe and we don't want any of this. So who do you think wins in that debate?
Well, I think tourism is such a driver, such an engine driver for foreign currency and for revenues and for GDPs of countries. In some countries, it's the second largest industry and employer in the country. So I think if they're organized in their country, tourism companies will have some clout with the local government. And I would certainly like to see visa rules regulated for the United States as well, by the way.
Mhm.
And I think it would be a smart thing to do. But you might have just the opposite reaction. Well, we don't want anyone coming from that country because they really had a lot of incidents of deaths in coronavirus. I'm close to a woman in Bangkok, and she tells me their government is always saying, we don't want any Westerners coming, particularly not those Americans. Look how many people have died. And when she first told me, I thought, oh yeah, well, she did not look, she's or they aren't looking at it as a percentage of population. And then I looked at our 50,000 plus dead as of a couple of days ago, 53 now, I think, in our population. And then I looked at Thailand, which only has a population of 70 million, but that's not peanuts.
Mhm.
And they had like, I don't know, 41 people had died.
Mhm.
So there went my comparison out the window. Now, are the Thai officials telling the truth? I don't know. I tend to doubt it. But it's interesting that anybody in Thailand was saying, we don't want any Americans coming because Americans, I think, spend a lot more money than their main tourists who are Chinese, who
Mm.
come from across the border.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot of our discussions in this Facebook group is have been around which passports are going to be stronger. There's all these rankings every year of the strength of passports based on ease of entry by
Canada,
visa, and
Canada.
I feel like my U.S. one is not going to be too strong for at least a few years. Unless there's the
Same.
mechanism to smooth it out. But yeah, I think eventually uh, countries that have a lot of American visitors are are going to have to find a way to do it. We just want to drive up to Vancouver to eat lunch. So that's from Seattle where we are. So,
Did you do that now? You can't, can you?
no. It's closed, and I think they just extended it even further, that the border is going to be closed except for very essential stuff. So
Oh
our
dear.
TNT supermarkets, these Chinese supermarkets in Canada, oh, just incredible. My wife just wants the seaweed salad at the salad bar, even at the supermarket. Is we would drive up just for that. So let's talk about your foodieism. Perhaps start in Europe, and then we'll canter over to some of the spots in Asia that lately you've been focusing on a lot. So you said in your tours, these are all places that you have dined at. So that's clearly a lot of meals. What's the strategy? How are you picking venues to eat yourself, to use in TV shows? How does that work?
Well, over the years, I've found some favorite restaurants of my own in various cities by just walking around and trying things. But usually I'll talk to someone I know in the town, in the city, in a place, even a region, whether, like, as I say, Tuscany or
Mm-hmm.
Provence, or talk to somebody who I know appreciates food and perhaps wine, whose taste I trust. Maybe a restaurateur I know. Where do restaurateurs go to eat? I always ask that question. Everybody asks concierges and hotels, where should I go for a special meal? And they often send you to the fanciest place in town where they either get a kickback or they know you're American and you're not going to like things with like suckers on the end of their tentacles and stuff. Um, so the way I usually ask where to eat, I go, where do you go for your wife or your husband's birthday? And
Mm-hmm.
they go, oh, well, there. And then you might find a place that's a little more authentic and a little
Mm-hmm.
more populated by locals. I'm pretty good at walking around cities and looking at restaurants and smelling. The smell inside a restaurant tells me something. The kind of people who are eating. I mean, if they're locals, that they get more points than if they're folks who just piled off a tour bus from the United States or somewhere else, a Western country. When if it's not if it's in an Asian country, for example. So that's how I choose them. And we have to balance. For tours, we can't do all Michelin starred restaurants in big cities because it would be cost prohibitive for people. And some people don't particularly care what restaurant we're choosing for dinner. I mean, nothing wrong with that. So we try to find restaurants that have good, solid, authentic local cooking for our guests. And that's pretty much it. And they're well priced.
Well, you mentioned Michelin stars, the Michelin star and various other lists. What are worthwhile? What are ones you will actually make an effort to seek out?
Well, I'm not somebody who collects Michelin starred restaurants necessarily. A lot of things go into getting a Michelin star. The quality of your china, perhaps. I don't care about the quality of your china. Um, it's just like hotels. A five-star hotel has to have room service at 3 in the morning. I don't need room service at 3 in the morning. Thank you. So
Mm-hmm.
I'd say the same thing to hotels. So I would look for, it doesn't have to be, it could just be recommended by Michelin. It could be recommended by someone else. I certainly have eaten in a lot of Michelin starred restaurants, and some have wowed me, and some have left me going, okay, I did that once in a lifetime. I mean, I like Thomas Keller, and I like the French Laundry, the idea of the French Laundry, which is very hard to get into in Napa
Mm-hmm.
and Santa Elena. But I've been there twice, and it's like 17 courses, very small courses, very precious courses, paired with a different wine, and it's an interesting experience. But would I want to go there once a month if I lived in Napa? No, I wouldn't. Leaving aside the price, which is hugely expensive. So Michelin stars aren't necessarily my guide to restaurants, but it's fun sometimes to go to. If I find with a 1 star, I'm sure it's going to be good eating.
And are there any that jump to mind the precious was a interesting word choice. The precious dining experiences that you'd recommend seeking out one time.
Well, I mean, I like to go to Jules Verne restaurant in the Eiffel Tower just because it lets me skip the line because they have a private elevator. So you can go there for lunch and have lunch and then go on up the Eiffel Tower without having to wait in a long line, or go before lunch. Well, after lunch, I guess, or before dinner, that sort of thing. I don't know. I haven't looked whether they still have a star or two. They used to. Um, I like Joel Robuchon's restaurants. I mean, even the one in Vegas at the MGM Grand, I really like. He's got a couple in Paris. He's got one, I think, in New York. I've never eaten in a New York one, but he may have one there. 11 Madison Park, I presume, has a Michelin star, though I've never looked. That's one of my favorite restaurants in the world. Um, Los Angeles, California, California restaurants always look good and the menus look great. And sometimes they're very good and sometimes they're sort of mediocre. I do it in my newsletter. I'm going to start listing restaurants because I'm terrible at remembering names.
Mm.
I can find them because I write them down, but I'm going to start listing, favorite restaurants in London and in Paris and in Los Angeles and in Minneapolis, St. Paul, where I live, DC, where I lived for 40 years. Uh, so one of my best friends owns a great sushi restaurant called Sushiko right on the DC line in Chevy Chase, Maryland, and he owns an izakaya restaurant called Dakaya, Daikaya, downtown, Daikaya, Dakaya, which is an izakaya restaurant. Izakaya is small servings of inventive ingredients. So you might
Mm.
have 4 or 5 of those. And there aren't a lot of izakaya restaurants outside of maybe New York and maybe LA and his place in DC. So that's a place I'd recommend definitely going to because it's really inventive and really cool, and you'll feel like you're in Tokyo when you're there.
How about LA? Because if you're sitting somewhere in LA, it's going to be an hour to get wherever or more. So, what are some of the areas where there's, let's say, clusters of good dining to base yourself?
Well, I stay with friends who live in Pacific Palisades, which is right next to Santa Monica, so it's obviously the west side, right on the ocean. And they don't like to drive into LA much. There's a place in LA, in Hollywood called Paley, Paley, after the former head of CBS, William Paley, because the CBS studios are right across the street. And it's a fine dining restaurant, Paley, Paley, I like. Um, Gosh, in Santa Monica, I was just there a few months ago when we could travel, and I ate at a couple of new restaurants. I'd have to look at my notes to get their names. I mean, the Water Grill in downtown LA and in Santa Monica are very good seafood restaurants. Um, my favorite chain in the United States is well, if you remember some restaurants called Houston's. There were 2 of them in New York. They're now called Hillstone. The parent company is called Hillstone, and they have restaurants like the Palm Beach Grill, Cherry Creek Grill in Denver, Palm Beach Grill in Palm Beach, the R&D Kitchen in Santa Monica, but they're all owned by Hillstone. And Hillstone, there are probably 60 of them, 70 of them in cities around the country, none here in Minnesota, alas. But they're all owned by one guy. They have never spent $1, not $1, Stefan, on advertising or PR. And they are full all the time. Some you can make reservations in, some you can't. Um, and they are just consistently good. I want to say middle of the road, but that's a little denigrating. They're just, I mean, this guy is a food Nazi, if you'll pardon the expression. I mean, his insistence on fresh ingredients, his insistence on a unique way of serving food, which is to say you don't have only one waiter or one wait person. Whoever passes by your table looks at you and sees what you need. You need, more bread. Well, they don't serve bread, by the way. Do you need more water? Would you like dessert? May we take away these plates? Would you like your iced tea refilled? So look for Hillstone restaurants. You can look at hillstone.com and you'll find them. But they don't want to be known as a chain, but they are. But they're insistent on excellence in ingredients and service and architecture. He's a nut about the architecture. His restaurants are always winning prizes for architecture. So if I had to pick something that's pretty much around the country in big cities, I'd pick a Hillstone restaurant any day.
I read an interesting article in Popular Science recently about efforts to re-engineer restaurants that have become so incredibly noisy that
Hmm.
it it damages the dining experience. So they've gone way beyond buzz to just extreme noise in so many cases.
And sometimes it's not just customer noise. They'll play the music really loud because it's supposed to feel hip, I guess. I don't know what the deal is, but yeah, you go in some restaurants that are hipper than thou, and the music's loud, and you go, I don't know, maybe I'm sounding like an old guy. Maybe if I was 23, I'd want some rock music blaring, but
I
not
think
when I
the
want to
article
talk.
argued that a lot of these newer restaurants that were designed to have that vibe were louder than rock concerts in terms of the intense volume that was pumping in. So trying to localize the different settings, it was interesting. It was a company Northern California that is building essentially the stuff they do for concert halls. They're scaling down to restaurants to isolate noise and things that will create little pockets of calm around diners while still having the buzz that gets
Okay.
people to vibe and excited. Uh,
Okay.
you
I don't
said
mind
you
music in a restaurant. I just don't want it too loud.
yeah.
Okay, I'll take that.
You said you lived in Europe for a time. Where did you live? Multiple places. One.
I'm an army brat, and my father was stationed twice in Germany. The first time I was too young to remember, pretty much. The second
Mhm.
time I was certainly old enough to remember. And every weekend, we'd get in the car, and the colonel would drive somewhere. So we would go to, we had friends in Bern at the American Embassy in Switzerland, in Bern, Switzerland. We'd go to Amsterdam, we'd go to Paris, we'd go all around Germany. So we traveled almost every weekend, it seemed. And then I went to high school in the Washington, D.C. area, and after 4 years of college in Ohio at Ohio University, I returned to Washington. And the first 20 years of my career, as you know, I was an investigative reporter, 11 of those years at the Washington Post right out of college. I was known as a scandal monger. I did a lot of political, sex, and financial scandal writing. And then
Hmm.
9 years at the City magazine, Washingtonian. So 20 years before I really started taking travel writing serious and became a contributing editor with National Geographic Traveler for 17 years. Anyway, so professionally for the first 40 years of my life, I was on the East Coast, which made it very easy to get to Europe, and fares were generally good, and I collected miles when those were invented, and so I traveled a lot to Europe, and I had friends there, and I sometimes just go to London for the weekend for a dinner party, or Paris, or Brussels, or something. So that's sort of how I became more familiar with Europe. I didn't get to Asia till I was about 33, maybe 34 years old. And boy, was I gobsmacked. I fell in love with Asia right away. I went to Hong Kong and Bangkok, and I was like, wait a minute. Nobody told me about this. And so people say, where would you rather go now? And I say Asia. Now, I think if my dad had been stationed in Asia, I'd traveled around Asia as a child and as a young adult, and didn't get to a European destination until I was 33 or 34, I'd be going, whoa, unbelievable. So it's what you're familiar with. It's what surprises you later in life, I think, that really impresses you. And the more you've been places, the less easily you're impressed. So when you are impressed, you're really impressed. And I know your audience has been to a lot of more places than I've been. So, but I have a feeling they probably agree with what I'm saying.
Yeah, I started in Asia, so Europe felt like, oh, this is my retirement home. And
Right, right. How fabulous is this? Right, right.
in that regard, we have a lot of people that have this digital nomad idea that with virus and visa restrictions, we have no idea where that will be. But let's set that aside. Let's say you're 20 something, maybe creative industry, interested in food, these areas. Pick a few places in Europe and a few in Asia that you would say that if you were in your 20s, that you'd like to be based there longer term.
Well, is this presuming you've not been to these places before?
Maybe you've been or not, but you're looking at say minimum 3 to 6 months.
Well, I mean, if you're interested in the wine business, you know, go get an apartment in the town of Chianti. Go into the wine growing regions of Italy, or France, or Spain, or even the country of Georgia, which has a great wine industry that not a lot of Americans appreciate. But if you're an urban file, certainly ease of language in most major European cities is fairly great these days. Obviously, you can go to London, or Edinburgh, or Glasgow, or wherever that they speak English, sort of. uh, but why not go to Amsterdam, or Brussels, or Paris, or go to Tallinn in Estonia, or Rome, or I mean, go to any of the big European cities that allow you to take easy train rides, or short flights, or even rental car drives to other places. Asia is a little more problematical because you know you the distances are greater, and you can't just you can. I mean, you can go from Hong Kong to Bangkok for dinner and come back. You can, but it's a 4 hour flight. Um, I would start in Hong Kong because English is widely spoken. Bangkok is certainly generally friendly to Americans. Singapore is all sleek and modern, and most people speak English. Uh, China is fairly polluted, as you know, so I don't know that I want to spend 3 to 6 weeks in Beijing or Shanghai, but I would start with Shanghai if I were going to start with China, leaving aside the fact Hong Kong's China as well. So I think those would be my first destinations.
Talk about the Georgian wine industry. Georgia's a country when I visited that was one of those like I really want to come back for a longer stay.
Exactly. And also, I knew nothing about it.
Hmm.
A friend of mine was having some kind of conference there, he said, "You got to come, you got to come." And I'd never been, but I didn't know anything about it. I knew it was a former Russian, satellite, and I didn't have time to read anything before I got there. But I just presumed it was going to be, sort of grim streets. Maybe grandmas out selling their old toasters on blankets on the sidewalk. Oh my goodness! When I got to Tbilisi, the capital, I was blown away, and I really want to go back as you do. Um, there's a hotel there, I think, called the Ambassadore,
Mm.
which is equivalent to a Four Seasons or a Ritz Carlton. And I believe at the time, this was a year and a half ago. It was maybe 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago. It was, $275 a night. Would have been 1,000 a night minimum in New York. There's a small chain of hotels called Rooms, Rooms, and there's a Rooms that's in a former printing factory in Tbilisi. And there, you'd be hard pressed to pay more than 160 a night. I would gather, for a very cool room in a very cool place with a very cool lounge and a very cool restaurant. The taxis are Mercedes. The streets are were 8 lanes wide. Beautiful architecture. And you're only a short drive away up into the Caucasus Mountains for great skiing in the winter, a couple hours away at the most. I went in the winter, so I saw beautiful ski resorts there. I didn't ski because it was a short conference for 2 days, but I would imagine going up in the Caucasus in the summer for hiking would be stunning. And I had my friend who invited me said, "Oh, yeah, I want to go a few days early to see it. I know it's too long a story, but do go to Tbilisi, Georgia." Anyway, he called a friend who said, "Hey, my friend Rudy's coming. He likes wine." He picked me up at the airport and he took me to a wine tasting of Georgian wines. I'm thinking, Georgian wines? We went to this wine store. There was floor to ceiling glass and chrome wine, all Georgian wine, wall to wall. I was like, what? Turns out it's on the same longitude as Bordeaux.
Mm.
And so the climate's very similar. I don't know about the soil, but the wines were fabulous. And the prices, by the way, you can have dinner for two in Tbilisi with a bottle of wine for, I don't know, $18 maybe at a nice restaurant. And the wines can be by the bottle can be 15, 14, $13, $21 for a very good bottle of red. So it's a beautiful wine scene. It's a beautiful dining scene. The people are wonderful. English is not as widely spoken as it is in Western European countries, but you can get along. You can always get along.
And there's usually some local drink. It may not be alcoholic in every country
Oh,
due
it's
to even
alcoholic.
wars, but do you always try the local drink? And is there one alcoholic or non that jumps out as
Well, I do always try the local drink, yes, because somebody always insists you try it. I don't know. What is that milky when you get in Korea? Not soshi. It's very similar to that.
soju
It's
is clear? Yeah,
soshu,
soju is
soju.
yeah.
Yeah,
Soju is a clear one, but you're saying milky, and I'm not.
I
Uh,
seem to recall there was a milky one. Not, I don't mean
yeah,
creamy in taste. I
yeah,
just meant
yeah,
white in color. I
yeah.
may be mistaken.
I'm blanking. Yeah. Mhm.
Anyway, don't worry. A local will get you to try it, and it's always very strong. Whether it's aquavit or whatever, it's gonna knock you back on your heels. So yeah, I try it. Vodka in Russia, of course, which
and
is not very
and
exotic, but it's the national drink.
so teaching yourself about different food in Asia, you recorded different programs with chefs in several major Asian cities. So what's that like? Making those connections and educating yourself about cuisines and in a way to present them to a TV audience.
Well, it's certainly hard to do on the radio, by the way, because nobody can see anything. At least on television, you can see the food, and it may look very good to you. If you like sushi, in our Tokyo episode, you're going to love the opening scene with the sushi 11-seat sushi restaurant with a guy, who's just a sushi master. He's the only guy there. He's a chef and cook and bottle washer. Um, but I mean, I remember shooting that show, and my friend Daisuke Utagawa, the gentleman I was saying owns the restaurants in Washington, was
Mhm.
my co-host on that show because he speaks Japanese. He grew up in Tokyo, and he's a chef,
Mhm.
and he knows food. It was the first time I had raw horse meat, which,
Mhm.
when you think about it, if you're willing to eat, raw steak, well, what's wrong with raw horse meat? Nothing.
Mhm.
I've never really had anything I don't like, except for sea slugs, those great big fat sea slug things you get in China and
The
Hong
sea
Kong.
cucumbers.
Sometimes, yeah, right, exactly. What do you
It's
call them?
about
Sea
the
cucumbers?
texture, not the flavor. Right?
Well, the flavor that chew, they're like leather chewing them. I mean, I think that's it. I remember I once was in Jordan a long time ago, and I was in the desert with camping out with local nomads, tribesmen, and they roasted a sheep, and I had to eat the eyeball. And see, I don't know if this is stuff true. They say, oh, because you are a guest of honor, you get the eyeball of the sheep. Now, I don't know if they do this because they know it's a private joke. Watch this guy eat the eyeball. Watch him. He's going to eat it. I ate it. I don't need to eat it again. But otherwise, I haven't had much food that I don't like, frankly. I mean, I really like all kinds of stuff. But I also was raised by an army colonel in post-World War II Europe, and apparently I went to somebody's house a local's house once, and turned my nose up at something, and I didn't know. My father certainly let me know later that this was a very big thing for them to be able to afford this food to give to us, and if I ever didn't eat everything on my plate, really bad things would happen. So growing up with an army colonel, you ate everything everywhere that was put in front of you. So I was trained early to have a broad palate, if you want to put the best spin on it.
And somewhere between the eyeball and the kernel leads me to, oh, that echo is back, but not, sorry, those that are commenting, I'm not sure why the echo suddenly appears or not. Do you have an external speaker connected, or is it the internal
Me?
one to your?
No, I'm using an internal speaker on my Surface Pro.
Do you
Okay.
have headphones handy that wouldn't totally disrupt everything?
I have headphones, but I don't know if there's a place for headphones here I've never attached them to this unit. Pardon me while I look around, and I certainly have headphones right nearby that I can put in if I can find a place to put them in. Stefan, I don't see a place for headphones. Nope.
Okay, I will keep talking as little as possible then. But
Okay.
Tyler Cowen, the economist who writes ethnic dining guide, especially around the DC area, his strategy, if you're trying a restaurant, is even from very high end to very humble, is order the strangest thing on the menu, because that's something that the chef put there because the chef cares about it, instead of, say, the chicken breast. So we've got somebody,
Right.
I think, who works for Microsoft. He says the headphone jack is on the upper left corner of the Surface Pro.
Oh my goodness. Upper left corner. On the screen? No. Oh, there is a little hole here. Oh my gosh. There is. I don't know if let me see. If my, we're looking for a microphone?
You can just plug
I
your
think this,
headphones in, so I'm not hearing
oh,
my echo.
headphone. I have a microphone. Let me see. Is
Just
this any better if I
headphones.
talk on a microphone? Is that any better?
Let's see if my echo keeps coming back. Oh, no, the microphone, we lost you.
Headphones, but I don't know if it'll fit this little tiny hole. Hang on.
Yeah, we have no idea why the echo's intermittent. We did all this testing an hour beforehand, and the echo never appeared, so I have no idea why it comes and goes.
I've done five of my webcasts so far, or four, I think maybe, and I have not had a single one that didn't have a technical glitch somewhere. It's weird. It's like very frustrating. But I don't know if this will fit. Let me see. Oh, it fit.
Huh.
All right, how's that?
I can hear you still. Can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine.
All
Does
right.
the
So
sound?
I think we'll
Does
have
it?
defeated the intermittent echo. So sorry about that. Thank you all for your
Really?
patience.
All right.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
that's very good to know. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Because I've
And
had
that's
some sound
Erica.
trouble when I've done.
Erica, she is a Microsoft expert, and
Erica, I need you. Where
thank
does
you.
Erica live? Is she anywhere? Erica, are you married?
I can wave to her across Lake Union in Seattle. She's somewhere up on
It's
Capitol
okay.
Hill, and I'm across
That's
Lake
okay.
Union. So
I love
if
Capitol
you,
Hill. I'll move to have a Microsoft expert at my beck and call. I'm just kidding.
okay, tell us
Eric,
about
you might,
Capitol Hill. Why do you love it? Someone who's never been to Seattle.
who's never? I've been to Seattle 100 times.
For somebody who's never been, Capitol Hill.
Oh, well, it reminds me a little bit of Washington, D.C., frankly. Gorgeous townhouses, really interesting architecture, a very neighborhoody feel. I mean, I've never spent any time there, I've just driven through it, so I'm not the best spokesman for Capitol Hill in Seattle, but if Eric is a Microsoft expert, as clearly she is, I'm all over it. So, all right, Eric, you don't have to, I just move in next door to Eric. You don't have to marry me, Eric. Okay.
And for those that are planning a visit to Seattle at some point, the light rail does go up that way. Or if you are so motivated, it's a very long uphill walk from downtown. Or in the reverse, it's a very pleasant descent down through all kinds of eateries. And if you must go to the Starbucks roastery, you'll pass it on the way as well when you're descending down into the city and heading towards the water. So it's a very hilly city, not quite the San Francisco model, but areas like Queen Anne also can feel like that San Francisco level of steepness. So
All right, there's your
yeah.
Capitol Hill description. Much better than mine. No question.
And I feel guilty. I've been in 3 years. I've maybe been up that way 5 times. I because the public transport network, it's very good for going downtown, but crisscrossing, I can just see it, and I've walked a few times. But there's a few highways to dodge, and
Your hometown is rarely your hero. I mean, I lived, I don't know, well, 5 decades in Washington, D.C. I went to the White House once as a reporter, but I never toured the White House. I went up to the Washington Monument once as I was a teenager because some cousins from Ohio came in and wanted to go up to the top of the Washington Monument. I was like, really? Okay. We were broke. I mean, I was probably 13, and I knew you had to pay to go up the elevator, by the way, on the Washington Monument. So we took the steps up. Oh,
mm,
killer, even when you're 13.
mm,
But you could ride down for free. So we're riding down the elevator, and I said to the elevator operator, I said, by the way, how much does it cost to ride up the elevator? He said 10 cents. Now that may have
mm.
changed now. I'm sure it's inflation has changed it, but I was like 10 cents. I figured it was like $5, which was a huge amount of money that 13-year-old kid at the time. Anyway, what I'm saying is you you rarely appreciate what's around you all the time, and I talk about being a tourist in your own hometown, going to things that people come to see. I'm sure I didn't go to the Smithsonian often enough. Fortunately, I had 2 kids, so that got me to the Smithsonian more than most. But
Mhm.
it's always there, so you don't go because Capitol Hill's always there. What are you going to do? I'm going to Capitol Hill to walk around? No, but you come as a visitor, you very well may. And it's interesting how what's new to us in someone else's city is someone else's blah. So meh.
We've got one question. Let's see who is asking. Oh, Ben Zand asked about the Athenaeum bar still in Pike's Place Market. So I don't know that since the shutdowns. I've just the other night I had one reason to be very late at night, just returning a rental car, dropping it off downtown, and so many of the stores are just totally boarded up. I assume just not wanting to pay for security or something. So a lot of downtown Seattle is just boarded up and shut down. Pike's Place Market. There's a few times where I've had friends visit, and they want the quick view of Seattle. And if I do have a rental car, I'll take them to Pike's Place Market, and I will let them stay exactly as long as the amount of time I can pretend I'm figuring out how to pay the parking meter and then tell them it's time to go. And that's the extent of my visits there. Is like I'll just fumble around for 15 minutes, but you're back in the car and we go. Otherwise, you walk back. So that's the rapid tour of Seattle that I do.
I'm sticking with Erica. I'm sticking with Erica then.
Yeah, I think she's a veteran. So he's saying, "Oh, charming old bar with a view of the water." Well, when it opens, hopefully it does still exist. I'll visit that. So sing the praises of my home state, your current residence, St. Paul, Minnesota, Minneapolis. What
I
month
moved
what
here,
month to go there and what to do.
Steph. Oh, all right. First of all, I moved here because of a woman. Okay, I didn't move here because I wanted to live in
Uh,
Minnesota because I don't like winter.
but I believe you're still there in a different circumstances.
Yeah, single. Yes. No, I
Yeah.
moved here 19 years ago. We were together 10 years, and she really hated Minnesota. She had gone to college here and had lived here for 22 years when I met her. She really hated it. But I lived in D.C. at the time. I can do my job anywhere. We were in love. I've been trying to get to Southern California for decades to live and have failed miserably. She also wanted to move to Southern California. Great. So we have something in common. We had to wait till our kids got out of high school, which we did. And by then, real estate prices, we'd bought an expensive place. Real estate price values had gone down. So we stayed around a little longer. And then she met some guy at a high school reunion back in Massachusetts, and that ended that. Well, she's now in Napa, and I've now lived here 9 years. So you might want to ask, what's wrong with this picture? But I will tell you, I'm not here much. I'm either in London or Bordeaux, where my granddaughters are, or I'm in I'm in LA where I have very good friends, or I'm in San Francisco where my son is, or I'm in Bangkok where currently I just got a thing saying my battery is running low. Oh, Erica, what do I do? Um, and basically, I try to get out of here during the winter, is what I'm trying to say. Having said that, it's a very easy place to live in. And basically, I store my wine here and my clothes here. And of all those cities I just mentioned, LA, San Francisco, London, Paris, New York, and DC, where many of my old friends are, there's no place less expensive to live than here. There's no place with less traffic. I have made many friends here in my 19 years, so I'm perfectly happy to be here, except I had to be here for a good part of winter, and I'm not happy about that. But Minneapolis, St. Paul is definitely a flyover city. I'm always surprised when somebody says, I'm going to come see you, but they're usually coming for a convention of sorts. But anyway, very easy place to live, great outdoor stuff, and a great summer from mid-May till September 10th.
September
Very
10th.
short. And brutal winters, brutal winters. Yeah.
Yeah, I've not used my winter jacket ever in Seattle, even when it snows. That's
I,
that's the
you
perspective.
can't believe, you cannot believe my coat closet, how many different coats I have for different weather. It's unbelievable. Got like 20 coats, depending on how cold it is, how windy it is, if it's snowy, if it's anyway.
It seems like you've been very strategic with your progeny to get children, grandchildren in the world cities that, that you've
Exactly,
successfully.
exactly,
What's
exactly. Everybody,
if you had a spare grandchild, which is the city you would want the grandchild to be located in?
you mean one more city?
Yeah,
Uh, oh, oh gosh. Maybe Hong Kong, maybe somewhere in New Zealand. You don't get to New Zealand enough. I'd love to live in New Zealand, but it's so far away from everybody, family and friends, that I can't do it. But if I had a grandchild there, it'd be an excuse to go anywhere in New Zealand.
fantastic. And that's a country that I've been several times, but not for the big nature trips that I would like to experience. So maybe we'll close with you dropped a comment earlier that nobody pressed you on, including me, was a what was it, a sex and political scandal reporter for years and years.
Well, that's how I've known it. In Washington, D.C., people know me who are my generation, remember me as being a guy who wrote a lot of scandals for the Washington Post. Yes. Yeah. A lot of politicians didn't like me then and probably still don't like me. So,
What
yeah.
did that particular experience teach you? I don't know, about life, journalism, politics. You
Well,
got
I'm the
out of
only
it.
one it taught me a lot about politicians. I was lied to so often by politicians, and I started at age 22, right out of college. And at first I believed it. And then I found out they were lying to me. And I was like, wait a minute, that's not right. So now I'm used to it. So now when I watch our current politicians, shall I say, and I see just these ridiculous statements and these ridiculous lies and mistruths, I go, I'm the only one who can still watch television news. All my friends are going, I can't take it anymore. But for me, I've had AP wired into my brain since I was, 18. So I love the news. I love watching politics. I love following politics. And I learned a lot about politics being a reporter at the Washington Post and at Washingtonian for 20 years.
With the news flood we have, and people that maybe tuned out of news for a while have been tuning back in. What's a recommendation to be an effective follower, observer of the news, and within
Well,
limits as well? Yeah.
I watch Fox and CNN and MSNBC. And while I probably, I don't really write about politics from my point of view, but I probably lean more toward, I find the coverage of CNN and MSNBC more factual than Fox. I mean, it is so colored by politics. But so are MSNBC. It's really been irritating me watching MSNBC and Brian Williams, who I respect as a reporter. They keep saying the president told you to take this disinfectant. Well, he never really said take it. He mused about the possibility of it being something you could take. Now, if you're a desperate person with the coronavirus, maybe you're desperate and you might want to try it. So it wasn't a great idea. It was a stupid thing to say, a stupid thing to do. But it bothers me because it's so easy as a journalist to make people think certain things. Like if I said, Stefan claims he's got 8,000 people who sometimes tune into his webcast, that's a lot different than saying, Stefan has 8,000 people who tune into his webcast. Because that claim subconsciously
Hmm.
affects the person I'm telling it to. And as a journalist, I probably appreciate more than some, because I've written a couple of books, I write a lot, the power of words. And it irritates me when journalists, even those who I may generally agree with their political stances aren't precise in their description of an event or what someone said. So you can imagine Fox drives me crazy too, but so does MSNBC, and sometimes so does CNN. So it's just trying to make your own thoughts and realize when you might be being played or when it might be coming through someone's particular colored lens.
Excellent. And I'm a big, I subscribe to a lot of publications. I get three print newspapers. I respect journalism a lot more than the current mood. And I feel like there's a lot
I
of
do too.
people that are trying to do a good service and they're not well paid. And the idea of tarnishing them all as horribly corrupt or poorly motivated and
I
conflating
couldn't
public
agree more.
perception versus intentional things. I'm curious. I mean, you could say by definition, most politicians you expect them to be lying to you, but let's just say you're out in the world wherever. How do you tell when somebody's lying?
Well, I don't expect most politicians to be lying to me, but certainly many do, or shade the truth at the very least. And I agree with you. I think journalism has been demonized, and there are incredibly smart reporters and writers out there of all political stripes, whether they're writing a column with a point of view or just covering the news. Um, so what your question was, how do you tell if someone's lying?
Just somebody on the street or
Oh,
interaction, the hotel concierge or whoever. I mean, it's
I don't know if there's one way. I mean, uh, I don't know if there's one way to tell. I mean, if they won't look you in the eye, if they prevaricate, if they tell you one thing one day and another thing the next day, you might go, you know what? I mean, I don't know. It
is your
just
default more trusting or less trusting?
my default is trusting, but certainly with most people trusting. Yeah, my default's sort of trusting, but boy, but I certainly when it comes to politicians or somebody trying to convince me of a particular point of view I'm not familiar with, I want to see a couple more sides of it before I draw my own conclusions.
Yeah, and last one, you say you write a lot, so you're in multiple different media areas, and I feel like a lot of us talk about wanting to write something, whether it's a personal memoir or news or different areas, and it can be extremely hard to actually do it. How do
It is.
you actually do it?
I do it to eat. I mean, I hate writing, Stefan. I love everything up to writing, which is
Hmm.
gathering the facts, the
Yeah.
information, asking people questions, being nosy. And I like everything after it. People saying, I read that article. That was really interesting. Yeah. But the actual physical act of writing is a lonesome thing. And sometimes if you've immersed yourself in a subject, you don't know where to begin. You've lost your original awe. And I tell young writers who go, why am I writing this book? They're three chapters into it and they're bored. Think of a nonfiction book, maybe. And I
Hmm.
said, look, try to capture the original wonder about this story. Try to condense it to one or two sentences. Why is this book going to be interesting? And you got to keep that wonder as you write. Because you get so deeply into something and you start writing, go, who cares about this? It's because you know so much about it that you're tired of it. So I write best when I'm afraid, which is to mean if I don't get this done, I won't get paid. So that certainly guided me through my entire career at the Washington Post, at Washingtonian, writing for National Geographic Traveler. I've written for every major magazine in the country and newspapers from around the world. And it's always fear of a deadline and an editor being mad at me and me not getting a check. Now I really just write my weekly newsletter, which is very personal. It has a lot of travel information. It's got sort of a personal point of view. It's certainly not political. So I don't write as much as I did, but every week I write a column, and every week I got to figure out guests for the radio show or for my a webcast. So then I have to write an introduction, that sort of thing. That's minor writing compared to books or long magazine pieces. But I always enjoyed everything up to it and after it, and I'm really glad I did it. But I hate writing, and I can understand why people who want to write sit down and write and go, I think I'll go play tennis.
Fear and eating leads to satisfaction. Well, thank you. We'll close there.
Exactly.
Thank you for joining us, Rudy.
Thank you for having me, Stefan, and thanks to your audience for asking great questions.